Hello, my name is George Aguilar. I'm the training manager here at Cla Val headquarters in Costa Mesa, California. In today's video, we're going to be discussing the rebuild and maintenance of our 55L60 relief pilot. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on the rebuild of our 55L60. Again, our 55L60 is an FM approved, UL listed relief pilot. The one thing I gotta suggest that you do first is visit our website. You visit our website, you're gonna find a installation operation maintenance guide for the 55L60. This is a good piece of information to start with. It does provide you with operation and adjustment procedures along with a disassembly of procedure as well. On the bottom right, you'll find troubleshooting, items to look for when troubleshooting. On the back side of that, you will find a parts list. So on the left-hand side, you have an exploded view of that pilot. And on the right-hand side, you have part descriptions along with the various spring ranges and those part numbers for those pilots. And on the bottom, most importantly, you have the PSI per turn rates for each of the different spring ranges. So it's good to start with this. Referring to part numbers, I want to mention that we do have repair kits, various repair kits. So we have a 55L60 repair kit. We also have a 55L repair kit. If you are not sure which pilot you have, you can purchase a universal repair kit, and that's the kit that I'm using today. Those repair kits you will find on that parts list. All right, so I'm using that universal repair kit. We'll go ahead and set that out. Let's go ahead and get started with the disassembly. So first things first, we're going to remove the cover. We're going to loosen up this jam nut, and I'm going to take a 3/8 wrench here, and I'm going to loosen the tension on the spring range, or on the spring here. Loosening will be counterclockwise, so counterclockwise just to back off that tension. Next, I'm going to remove this bottom plug here. We will need access to the bottom of this body. So we remove that. Now let's go ahead and remove the cover. So the cover, you're going to find either flathead screws or Allen heads. These Allen heads are 5/32 size. So let's go ahead and remove these. This is why it's important that you remove the tension on the cover, on the spring here. If not, you'll find that this cover starts to get kinked a little over on its side, or you have the ability for this cover to just kind of pop off. So you want to make sure that you remove the tension before removing those screws. So, got our cover, our spring and our spring guides. We have 2 spring guides, one on each side. Now, in order to remove this stem nut, sometimes you'll find that the stem assembly is just spinning. On the bottom side, this is why we have to remove that plug. You will see the disc, the lower end of the disc. That's where you'll use a screwdriver. You'll see the screwdriver slot to hold that stem assembly in place while you loosen that stem nut. Stem, there's our stem nut, there's our Belleville washer, our diaphragm washer, the diaphragm. And then that gives us access to our lower diaphragm washer, and now we see our stem guide. So it's very important once you get to this step that you're not using a crescent wrench or an open-ended wrench to loosen this up. All right, you will cause damage to the diaphragm support area on the sides here. This is where I use a 3/4 inch long socket, and we'll loosen this up. That'll give us access to that stem assembly and that stem guide. We'll set that aside. You'll see inside the body here. Now the 55L60 is a self-sensing relief pilot. So on the side right here, you'll see this is plugged. On the side right here, there is a little hole. This sensing hole is where the pilot is sensing this inlet pressure. Again, this is a direct acting pressure relief pilot. All right, so you want to make sure that this port right here is clear of any debris. So again, a long pick, a paper clip or something, make sure that that area is clear. All right, you'll also have a little area just inside here where you see that sensing port. Make sure that that is clear as well. Now, with some 400 wet dry sandpaper, you want to make sure that this diaphragm support area is just cleaned up. Make sure your seat, a little sanding on that seat there and this diaphragm support area, and the body is good to go. We'll set that aside. Now, on this disc, the stem guide and the stem assembly, we'll disassemble those. This is one piece, all right? This disc does not come, it is pressed inside. You cannot loosen this up. It is one piece. The one thing that we do have to replace on it is this small O-ring. So we'll go ahead and replace that O-ring. You can see that small O-ring there. We'll set that aside. There's O-ring number one. There's our diaphragm. And then this is going to be replaced. On this stem guide, you have an O-ring here, a large O-ring on the outer end. There's O-ring number two. And then on the inside is our stem guide O-ring here. We're going to remove that. There's O-ring number three. All right. Now let's go ahead and get into our repair kit. Find our spare parts. Again, I'm using the universal repair kit, so you will find that there are a couple of extra O-rings. Here's our diaphragm. Here's our stem assembly here. Again, this disc is for our CRL or our 55L. This is not going to be used. We have a couple of extra screws, which we will not need. And we see our O-rings here. So if I'm matching up the O-rings that I used before, again, here's our one for our stem assembly. Here's this larger thick O-ring that goes inside that stem guide. And then we only need one. We only need one of these smaller O-rings. So I'll set these other two O-rings aside, and we'll go ahead and get started. So this smaller O-ring is going to go on the stem. A little bit of food grade grease will help and hold these in place. There's one. We have this large O-ring here that goes around the edge. And this thicker O-ring sits in the middle. This is where one of these picks is going to come in handy. So we will set this in there, work our way around. There we go. And now we can assemble our stem assembly and our stem guide. We'll thread this back in. There we go. Now, it's important to remember as we start stacking these up, all Cla Val parts have these record serrations. All right, so this lower diaphragm washer, these record serrations need to be touching the diaphragm. So there's a flat side and there is a side with these record serrations. We want that facing up. Our diaphragms, there's no top or bottom to the diaphragms. But Cla Val does suggest that you have the date stamp facing up. Just for future reference, you know what the date code is on that diaphragm. Diaphragm washer, again, there's those record serrations. We're going to have those facing the diaphragm. The Belleville washer, a Belleville washer has a slight concave. You want that concave facing down. So that way when we get that stem nut on there, that flattens it out, similar to what a pressure washer does. So concave facing down on there. We have our stem nut. And at this point, again, it's important to remember that this stem will keep spinning unless you're holding it from down below. You got to hold that disc from down below and tighten that stem nut down. There we go. Tighten that down. Now, your stem guides or your spring guides, one on each side there. You want to make sure sometimes these pilots are installed on their side like this. All right. You want to make sure that when you're putting these covers on, that those stem guides don't end up falling off. So a little trick that we use here is we get the adjustment screw, and you want to go down about halfway. Take your spring and those spring guides, set that inside, and hold that spring in with your finger there. Again, if these pilots are installed on their sides like this, you can just center that spring on there and hold your cover, and then loosen up the tension on your cover until the cover is flat and flush with the body. So there's a little trick that we use to get that cover on. Again, this weep hole here, this machined hole that's in the cover, you want to make sure that weep hole is facing down. If your pilot is installed in this position here upright, it doesn't matter where that cover is or where that hole is lined up, but if it is installed on its side, you want that weep hole facing down. All right, this weep hole here is a tattletale to let you know that the diaphragm has failed. So you want to make sure that that's facing down so this cap doesn't get, or so this cover doesn't get filled with water and end up compromising the spring, breaking that spring or rusting that over. So we get that covered up. We get our cover screws in. All right, we got those tightened down. We can't forget our body plug here. And we got our cap. And that's the rebuild of our 55L60. Now for startup procedures or anything on this pilot, please visit our website. Again, you always have that IOM available as well. These are occasionally used as a standoff pilot. So just as a reference, you always want to remember that it's clockwise will always increase your pressure on these pilots. All right, so clockwise is always going to increase, counterclockwise will decrease. So it would be a smart start on the startup of this 55L60 to start all the way clockwise. For example, on this one here, this is a 20 to 200 spring range. So on this 20 to 200 spring range, if I go clockwise as far as I can, I'm close to 200 PSI on the set point of this pilot. So starting this up, I would go clockwise as such, and then you would slowly start going counterclockwise until this valve or until this pilot starts to bleed off. At the point, if I'm going clockwise, at the point where this starts to leak out, you know that's when you are at current system pressure. So if I'm at 125 PSI on my system side and I go clockwise, at the point where this starts to bleed out, I'm set at 125. That's when you would look at that IOM that I was referring to earlier. In this case, it's a 20 to 200 spring range. So one full rotation on this pilot will give me 28 PSI. If I'm currently at 125 and I'm bleeding off and I want to set this at 135, I can just go a half turn clockwise. This is not going to be bleeding out no more, and now I'm set at 135. All right, so it's simple to do your math and to understand where you are, but you have to know which spring range you have and then you have to know what the PSI per turn is. So that's where that IOM would come into play. All right, once you've set, we get that cover on. That includes the rebuild and the setting of our 55L60 pressure relief pilot. That concludes this maintenance video. Please visit our website for future videos and for more information. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day.